All right, let's write our first app, shall we? So the way that we're going to start with our iOS app is we'll open Xcode. So I do that on my machine by hitting Command Space Bar and then typing in Xcode. This is going to let me bring up any application straight from the keyboard. So now I have two options for how to start my first app. I'm either going to click here in the center of this pop-up on Create a new Xcode project, or I can also go to the File menu in the top on the top bar, New, and then Project. So either of those will work. And now I'm given a menu that gives me the option of choosing between a couple of different app styles. I can make a game, an augmented reality app, a document-based app, a tabbed app. I'm going to go with a simple single view app for now. I'm going to click next. Now I need to give my app a name. I'm going to call it Light Switch App. It needs to have an organization identifier as well. This will be the name of the company that you're writing it for typically, but you can give it any organization identifier that you want for now. For my personal apps, I use my name. Then you can put in an organization name if you like to. That's just my name. For language, you can choose between Swift and Objective-C. Objective-C is what iOS apps used to be written in. You can still write with it, but the modern is Swift. That's what we're going to use. Then for user interface, you can choose between Storyboard and Swift UI. Swift UI is a relatively new way of doing your user interface on your applications. It's really cool, but not fully featured yet. And for now, storyboards are still needed on the vast majority of iOS apps. So we are going to go with Storyboard here. Now I want you to click Next in the lower right-hand corner. You get to choose where you want your app to live in your file system. So I'm going to click Create in the lower right-hand corner. And I'm going to replace. You shouldn't have to click replace. I've just already written this app before, and so I click replace. Great. So now I'm looking at a file referred to as my schema. My schema includes some important information about my application and how it can run on devices. We see the display name, which we chose earlier, our bundle identifier, which includes my organization name and then my app name. This is the first version and the first build of this app. The app runs on both iPhone and iPad. I can check or uncheck these if I want it to only show on one of those two devices. I'll leave it so it installs on both. Then I can choose orientations to which this app can adhere. So for now, it is both portrait and landscape, but you can uncheck these landscape things if you want to lock an app to portrait mode. I'm going to leave it portrait and landscape for now. We'll talk about some of these other options later in the class, but this is your basic schema. Before we move on, I would also like to introduce you to some of the options that you have for changing things inside of Xcode. So we're going to focus chiefly for now on the menus available to you on the left side of Xcode. So we're over here on the left side, and right now what you're looking at is a file inspector for your application. If I close all of these triangles here, you see at the very top, light switch app with a blue icon next to it. Inside of this light switch app with the blue icon next to it, you see your targets represented. You have four targets. First is your app itself. Next is your unit test target. Next is your UI test target. And these are your products, which include your app and your testing products. We're going to focus chiefly on the app target for now. So I can click on this arrow right here to expand or contract my list of files, or I can hit the right arrow and the left arrow on my keyboard to expand and contract those. These are the files that make up my application. We'll go into what these files are later. In the meantime, let's look at some of the other menus available to you on this left-hand side. Now, I can always get to my file navigator with Command 1. That's the key binding that I use on my keyboard in order to get to that. Command 2 brings me to the next tab over in this left-hand menu. And this is where I can see stuff about my version control. Command 3 takes me to my object navigator, symbol navigator it's called. And that's going to let you look at the specific classes and methods in your application. So this allows you to navigate by your actual objects rather than by files. Command 4 allows you to search for specific text in your application. And so I could use this to find everywhere where it says, for example, application. I'm going to see all of the places where that word appears throughout my code. Command 5 is going to take me to my issue navigator. So this is where I'm going to see errors and warnings for my app. Command 6 is my test navigator. This is where I can run the tests. Tests take a relatively long time to run, particularly the first time in iOS. But if I were to hit any of these play buttons next to any of my example tests, I could run the test that way. Command 7 is going to take me to my debug navigator, which I can use when debugging my app. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I use that hand in hand with the menu that I reach with Command 8, which is my breakpoint navigator. We'll do a whole exercise on breakpoints later. Finally, Command 9 allows me to see my reports that I've run on my application. I get a report each time I build my app, each time I update the signing configs, and each time I run specific debug processes. All right, so that's my menu on the left here. There is one more thing I want to show you, which is that you can have a toolbar along the bottom of your app. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see a set of buttons with the side menus represented, the left-hand menu, which we can expand and contract that we just talked about, and then the bottom menu. So in the bottom here, you're going to have the ability to see and print stuff out when you're debugging, and you're also going to be able to see console messages there as you're running your application. We'll see an example of that a little later. In the next video, we'll go over the right-hand menu, which we're chiefly going to use while we are updating the user interface of our application.